So if you are appearing for May-June 2026, this Feb March 2026 paper is extremely important. So most students don't lose marks because they don't know the content, but because they don't understand what the question is asking. Before I start the question, I want you to pause the video, attempt each question, and then come back and solve it with me. Keep your paper and pen ready. Treat this like a real exam. So, this is the first question. The features of an organism are used to classify them into one of the five kingdoms. One kingdom is animal kingdom. You need to state the name of other two kingdom. So, if you look at the question, you need to understand that this is a 2-marker question. So, you need to give them 2 points. The keyword over here is state. So the name of the other two kingdoms would be fungi and plantae. Okay, you could even write protoctist or bacteria because those will form the 5 kingdoms. Moving on to the second part of the first question. Here we have a table where they have given you different statements. You need to describe all organisms in the animal kingdom. So here their cell walls have cell wall. No, that's definitely not the feature of animal kingdom. It is only found in plants. Second, they have lungs. Not all animals would have lungs. Okay, they are all multicellular. Yes, they are all multicellular. Are they all vertebrates? No, some are even invertebrates. Fourth, they obtain their energy by consuming other organisms. Yes, that's definitely a key feature of animal kingdom, and we even have a name for this, which is heterotrophs. They respire. Yes, that's also a key feature of animal kingdom. So that way you read a statement, you think, and accordingly you answer the question. Moving on to the B part of the first question. So this is again a 1-marker question where Felidae are group of animals which are commonly known as the cat family. There are 41 species in the cat family. The base sequence of DNA of cat species have been compared. So here you need to draw an X to identify a base. So what we see over here is a DNA molecule. Okay, when you look at the structure, we know that DNA molecule is made up of 3 parts, which is the nitrogen base pair, a deoxyribose sugar group, and a phosphate group. So in this, you need to identify a base. So this is basically the nitrogen base pair, where you could write X in any of the boxes. Okay, and the bond between them is a hydrogen bond. Okay, so that is going to give you your 1 mark. Moving on to the third part of the question. Here they have said that DNA is made up of 4 different bases. Base G is one of the bases. You need to state the letter of the 3 other bases and state which bases pair together. Since this is a 2-marker question, you need to give 2 valid points. They've already said that base G is one of the bases. So the other bases would be A, T and C, which is adenine, thymine and cytosine. Now, when we talk about the pairing, you need to know that A is going to pair with T and C is going to pair with G. But always remember, there are 3 hydrogen bonds between C and G, and there are 2 hydrogen bonds between A and T. Figure 1.2 shows evolutionary relationships between several species of cat based on their DNA sequences. The diagram should be interpreted from left to right. Each branch shows the point at which a new species is formed. So figure 1.2 is actually a phylogenetic tree. The species that branches off earliest is the one closest to the left line, which is the ancestor line. It's very important because the diagram has to be interpreted that way. Okay, so use figure 1.2 to determine which species has the closest base sequence to the Felidae ancestor. Again, which species has the closest base sequence to the Felidae ancestor? So this is a straightforward question. So you need to look at the diagram and see which species has the closest base sequence to the Felidae ancestor. And the answer for this is, take your time. Okay, so the answer is the clouded leopard. Use figure 1.2 to determine which two species are most closely related. You're going to observe the figure again and you will see which two species share the most recent common ancestor compared to any other pair. If you look closely, the only pair that shows the most closely relation is lion and leopard. Guys, it is very important to highlight the command word. Here the command word is explain. So one mark is for identifying and one more mark is for a proper explanation. So here the explanation would be they share the most recent common ancestor. Okay. With this, we now move on to the D part of the question. We see a photomicrograph of an animal cell. So these are the different organelles of the animal cell. You need to identify the cell membrane and the nucleus. All you need to do is state the letter. So cell membrane is A, since it is the outer boundary of the cell, and D has to be nucleus since it's large, dark and placed at the center. You also need to state the letter that identifies a mitochondria and also describe the key functions of mitochondria. So here are the two command words that you need to identify the mitochondria, and you also need to describe the functions of mitochondria. Now if you look closely at the diagram, you will understand that B is your mitochondria since you see these foldings that are inside. Okay, so you're going to write letter B. You need to write down the functions of mitochondria. The functions of mitochondria, it is the site for aerobic respiration and it releases energy in the form of ATP from glucose. Moving on to the third part, the cell shown in figure 1.3 contains ribosomes. You need to state the function for ribosome. Now this is again a very straightforward question for 1 mark. It is the site for protein synthesis. Moving on to the fourth part, the magnification of a photomicrograph is 18,000. You need to state other measurement needed to calculate the actual size of the cell. Basically, you need to know the formula for magnification. M is equal to I upon A. That's the original formula, but since you need actual size, you can simply rearrange. Actual size is image size upon magnification. Alright, if you got this correct, great start. If not, make sure you understand where you lost marks. Now, let's move to question 2. Again, before we solve this, pause the video and try it for yourself. So, a scientist is investigating the effect of temperature on the rate of photosynthesis in 3 plant species. This is the graph. At the maximum rate of photosynthesis, species 1 makes 15 grams of carbohydrate per day. Use figure 2.1 to calculate the mass of carbohydrate made by species 1 per day at 0 degrees Celsius. They've also given you space for working. Okay, so you're going to look at the graph. At 0 degrees Celsius, the rate of photosynthesis is 85% of its maximum. Then second, the problem clearly states that at maximum rate, which is 100%, this is 100%, species 1 makes 15 grams of carbohydrates per day. So to find out the mass at 85%, what are you going to do? So mass is nothing but 85% of 15, and that's going to give us, so the mass is going to be 12.75. Moving on to the sub part of the question, the scientist has formed several conclusions. You need to tick all the conclusions that are supported by the data. So if I look at the first one, at every temperature, species 3 has a greater rate than species 1. So if you look at the diagram, here you need to observe species 1 and species 3. So at lower temperature from 0 degree to 10 degree Celsius, species 1 is clearly higher than species 3. Hence at every temperature is incorrect. Species 1 has rate of at least 50% of the maximum over a temperature range of 23 degrees Celsius. So for statement 2, what you need to do is check where species 1 is 50%. So if you look at the graph, roughly about 5 to 18 degrees Celsius, which is definitely not in the 23 degree range. It's closer to 20 to 21. The statement is not well supported. Exam marking expects accurate reading. Now, for third one, species 2 has greater rate of photosynthesis. Again, this is not true at all temperatures. Sometimes species 1 is higher. Also, the statement too general. So that's also going to be wrong. Lastly, now you need to compare species 1 and 3. Species 1 is going to peak around 5 degrees Celsius, and species 3 peaks around 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, which means that this is clearly higher, and which is why this statement is going to be true. Okay, so whenever they ask you to for supporting data questions, you have to keep looking at the graph and analyze your answer. Okay, so now moving on to the next part. This is a 6-marker question where you need to describe and explain both. These command words are something which will help you gain marks. So you need to describe and explain the effect of temperature on rate of photosynthesis for species 1. So you have to look specifically for species 1 and make your statements. So for description, you could say, as temperature increases, the rate of photosynthesis increase until it reaches a optimum temperature. So if you look at the graph, you see for species 1, the rough value is around 25 to 30 degrees Celsius. The optimum temperature for species 1 is around 50 degrees Celsius. Above optimum temperature, the rate of photosynthesis decreases rapidly. So this is basically the description. You've not given explanation as to why it happens. Okay, now moving on to the explanation part, you could say, so increasing temperature will provide more kinetic energy to the molecules, and that will eventually lead to more frequent successful collisions between the enzymes and the substrate. At peak, basically at the optimum temperature, enzyme substrate complexes are going to form at the maximum possible rate, and then you end it why it decreases. So at high temperatures, the enzymes are denatured, which means the active site has now changed its shape and the substrate can no longer bind, and the reaction will eventually stop. One tip to remember, always ensure you quote specific data points, the coordinates from figure 2.1 in your describe section to secure full marks for data handling. Moving on to the B part, they've asked, state the balanced equation for photosynthesis. This is again based on your theory. The balanced chemical equation for photosynthesis is, I'm expecting you guys would do this. If you write this, you are going to get 2 marks. Moving on to the second part of the question, you need to explain why plants need magnesium ions to photosynthesize. So for 2 marks, you need to give at least 2 valid points. Plants require magnesium ions because they... So for 2 marks, this is what you need to write. Chlorophyll is used to trap light energy and make glucose. So without magnesium ions, plants cannot photosynthesize. So in the C part, they have said that carbohydrate made during photosynthesis is made into larger carbohydrate for specific functions. So this is a table where they've given you the carbohydrate and they expect you to know the function in a plant. This is again very important. This is from chapter plant nutrition. So starch, what could be the function? It is used for energy storage. Then they ask you about cellulose. Cellulose is basically needed to make cell walls of the plant, which gives you the structural support or rigidity. So you could write this. Okay. Now in the third part, they have already given you the function. They expect you to know the carbohydrate. So here the function says that it's translocated in the phloem. So basically from source to sink. The answer for this is sucrose. Now moving to the third question, the figure shows different types of blood cells in the human body. You need to use this figure and identify the types of blood vessels. By looking at this diagram, we clearly understand that J is your artery. Why is it an artery? Because arteries are the one that carry blood away from the heart towards the capillaries. Okay? And K is your vein, because veins will carry blood back towards the heart from the capillaries. So here, since this is for 1 mark, you just have to identify. You don't have to give the explanation. The explanation is just for you all to understand. Second, on figure 3.1, you need to draw a label line and letter P to show where the pressure of the blood is highest. So if you know the properties of the blood vessels, you will know that arteries always have thick walls and they have a very narrow lumen. Because the lumen is very small, the pressure is obviously going to be more. So the blood pressure is at its highest in the vessel carrying blood directly from the heart. So the answer over here is P. This is where the pressure is going to be the most. Now in the third question, they have asked that explain how the structure of capillaries is related to its function. The question is very direct. This is a 5-marker question. You will state the point and then you will explain them with its function. That's how you're going to get the 5 marks. State the points and then explain each of them in detail. So why do they have thin walls? Because they are very thin, it is going to reduce the diffusion distance for exchange of materials. Now that could be your oxygen, glucose and waste products. Now second, because it has a narrow lumen, it is going to allow more time for exchange as RBC is going to pass very slowly and efficiently. Third, having a large surface area is helping the capillaries because it's simply maximizing the area for diffusion, as the capillary beds will now have an extensive network throughout the tissues. Finally, they are all permeable. They have pores that will allow plasma and dissolved substances to leak out and form fluid. Tissue to form tissue fluid. Now moving to the B section, they have said that white blood cells are one component of blood. You need to state the other 2 components of blood. This is from chapter Transport of Animals. Again, it's a straightforward question. So if your theory is good, all these questions are pretty easy to go. Okay, so name the other 2 components of blood. I give you a moment to write. So the answer for this is plasma, red blood cells. You could even write platelets. Moving forward, lymphocytes are one type of white blood cells. You need to explain how lymphocytes protect the body from infection. Again, this is a 4-marker question. You need to build your answer. Before answering this question, you need to remember that the response has to be specific to a particular pathogen's antigen. Here, I'll just give you a rough idea. So when pathogen enters the body, it has antigen on the surface. The lymphocyte is going to detect these foreign antigen and produce specific antibodies which will bind to these antigens. And now the antigens will either neutralize the pathogen or mark it for the phagocyte, which will come and simply destroy it. Out of these, some lymphocyte will become memory cells, which is eventually going to give you faster immune response upon reinfection. So this is how you will form your answer for 4 mark. So this is what you can expect for 4 mark. If you've given all these key terms, you're going to get 4 marks. Moving on to the 4th question. So this is a section through the human eye. You need to identify the structures L and M. This is one of the most important chapter for your IGCSE. So you have to know all these labelings well. Take a moment and try answering it by yourself. So the structures here is L is your cornea, which is the transparent front layer, and M is your iris. Now next, you need to draw a label line and letter F to identify the fovea. If we go back to the structure, a fovea is a small depression which is present at the back of the retina. This F is going to be your fovea. Third part, for the same question, they want you to describe how the fovea is adapted for its function. For 3 mark, you need to give at least 3 points. Why does it have high density of cone cells? Because that helps in giving you a detailed color vision and high resolution. Because the light is direct, it allows the light to directly fall on the photoreceptors. Because it does not have rod cells, it only exclusively contains cones, making it the center for the sharpest vision, though it functions poorly in very low light. Okay, so I hope this concept is clear. Now let's move on to the B part of the fourth question. This shows a part of the eye from the front and from the side when viewing a near object. You need to use figure 4.2 to explain the changes that occur to view a distant object. So the question is very direct. What changes will happen in the lens when you view a distant object? So this is from coordination and response. The subtopic for this is sense organ, one of the most important topic for your exam. So here what you will do is, for 4 marker you need to give 4 points, but also you need to elaborate on those points. The first thing, ciliary muscles will relax. When they relax, the ciliary muscles move away from the lens. In the second point, they say that suspensory ligament become tight. Now this is going to increase the tension on the edges of the lens, right? And because of this tightening, the refraction will decrease because light rays from the distant object are bent less, and since it's bent less, the focus is directly on the retina. Okay, so these are the 4 points, but it's better if you explain them. That would give you the additional mark. This is the detailed answer for 4 marks. You write all the points, you get your 4 marks. Here you need to state the term that describes the ability of eye to view near and distant objects both. Again, a very straightforward question. So the answer for this is accommodation. Okay, now moving on to the 5th question, your inheritance chapter. A lot of people find this difficult, but with practice you definitely get better. Let's solve the A part of this question. So eye color in fruit flies is controlled by a single gene. They have given you the alleles. They have strictly said that the alleles are found on the X chromosome. Now some of them have red eyes, some of them have white eyes. They have also stated which one's dominant and which one's recessive. So the red eye is dominant, which is represented by letter R. The allele for white eye is recessive and it's represented by letter small r. Now here they have said that a male fruit fly with this genotype is bred with genotype. So you simply need to answer this question. State the eye color of the male and female fruit flies. Male eye color is this, which means you see a presence of capital R, which means that it is red. And female eye color, since there's a small r, which means it's recessive, it means that the color is white. So male eye color is red and female eye color is white. In the second part, they want you to state the term used to describe an individual who has 2 identical alleles. Whenever you have 2 identical alleles, we call that as homozygous. Now in the third part, you need to complete the Punnett square to determine the genotype and phenotype ratio of the offspring. So you need to do the cross between the male and female. The genotypes are given. When you do the cross, this is what you get. we see that the phenotypic ratio of the offspring is 50% red-eyed, 50% white-eyed. So the phenotypic ratio of the offspring is 1:1, which means there's one red-eyed female is to one white-eyed male. What is the name of this type of monohybrid inheritance? The answer to this is sex-linked inheritance. If you want to be specific, you can even call it as X-linked inheritance because the genes are found on the X chromosome. Moving on to the B part of this question, this is again a theoretical question where you need to complete the sentences about the genetic material in fruit flies. So the nucleus in a body cell contains dash pair of chromosomes. So we have 1, 2, 3 and 4. There are 4 pair of chromosomes where a cell with a pair of each type of chromosome is known as a diploid cell, because a diploid cell will always have 2 set of chromosomes. Now before the cell divides by mitosis, the chromosomes must either replicate or duplicate to maintain the chromosome number in each daughter cell. This is simple to score, 4 marks in your pocket. Now moving on to the last question of this paper. So you see a food web from a food ecosystem. By using the food web, you need to identify all the producers, the organisms that feed a secondary consumer, and an organism that is going to consume at 3 trophic levels. When you look at the food web, you clearly see there are 2 organisms which are beginning the whole food chain. The producers that we see in this food web are hornwort and phytoplankton. Then on organisms that feed only as a secondary consumer, the answer to this is shrimp. Because if you look at the food web, this is like the producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer. But if I look at the other food chain, this is also behaving as a primary consumer and this is behaving as a secondary consumer. So shrimp is the only organism that is going to feed as secondary consumer. Third, an organism that consumes at 3 trophic level. The answer to this is rainbow trout. Now why is it rainbow trout? Because if you look at the different food chain, let me just highlight it for you. 1, 2, 3. This is the first food chain. If you consider the different food chain, you will see that rainbow trout is consuming at all the 3 trophic levels, which is why the answer is rainbow trout. Okay, now last you need to construct a food chain that contains the 6 trophic levels. So in this question, you need to build a food chain. So to reach 6 levels, you need to follow the longest path of the energy flow, which is... I want you all to pause this video and try this by yourself. Also, remember this question is from organisms and environment. These kind of questions, they come in most of your papers. So you can expect a similar question in your May exam. So that's my longest chain that has all the 6 trophic levels. Next question. So newt is an amphibian. You need to state one feature of vertebrates which are only found in amphibians. Moist, permeable skin. Okay, finally we have reached to the end where they have said that humans harvest rainbow trout for food. You need to explain the possible effect of humans harvesting rainbow trout on population of bald eagles. So you basically need to tell how rainbow trout's population will affect the population of bald eagles. So in a typical aquatic food web, bald eagles will act as a predators of rainbow trout. So, but now if humans harvest the trout, what is going to happen? There will be decrease in the population, there will be increased competition. So reduction in rainbow trout population means there is less food available for bald eagles, and because there is less food available, there will be increased competition. They will have to compete more intensely with other predators for the remaining trout. Got it? And eventually, if there is reduction in the trout population, it will eventually lead to decrease in the population of bald eagle. Here, you need to explain why is it more energy efficient for humans to eat crop plants than it is for humans to eat rainbow trout. In a typical food chain, remember 90% of your energy is lost almost at each levels, either through respiration, through waste, through movement, through growth, etc. So what happens when humans eat plants? They are acting as primary consumers, which means they will receive maximum amount of energy which is available from the original source. But when humans eat a rainbow trout, they are consuming at a much higher level, which means energy has already been lost through the several steps. The key point to remember in these kind of question is shorter food chain supports a larger population because significantly less energy is wasted before reaching the